Stop me if you've heard something like this before.
Anime is a Japanese colloquialism short for animation, and to Japanese people, it refers to any and all animation from Dragon Ball to Disney.
This seems to be one of those common knowledge type deals that everyone just seems to say without really thinking too much about it. With everyone from AniTuber to ANN spouting that anime is simply short for animation, or as ANN calls it, animation. Wow, spelling mistake in an etymology article, how embarrassing. Both terms are used with a fair amount of frequency in modern Japan, with a lot of bleed over in usage. While in the West, there is an ongoing, continued, furious debate over what constitutes as an anime, with arguments ranging anywhere from a genre, style, Japanese animation, an industry using a complex series of artistic codes derived from a particular historical application of limited animation techniques, and consequences such as sites like MyAnimeList refusing to list anything that wasn't initially produced and intended for airing in East Asia. No matter where you fall though, almost everyone in the West seems to agree that there is at least some degree of separation between anime and animation. But not much thought is given to that first part, the anime is short for animation part. Most people just accept this, that it's just an English loanword, that's it, because, well, it's not necessarily wrong and it just sounds right. Right? Japanese has a lot of English loanwords. And when I say a lot, I mean a lot. And when I say I mean a lot, I mean a lot, I mean a lot. Japanese also likes to shorten those loanwords. For example, smartphone becomes sumaho, and potato chips becomes potechi. Sounds cute, right? So even many Japanese sources have to cite the seemingly undeniable fact that anime comes from animation. But the history and usage of the term is far more complex than this implies. At the birth of the animation movement, several terms were in use, before settling on two: doga, as proposed by videographer Kenzo Masaoka as a literal translation of the word animation. It has since evolved to mean video, specifically videos on the internet, but the historical usage of it can still be seen in the historical name for Toei animation, Toedoga. The other common term in use was manga eiga, or manga films. Now this may surprise you considering that in English, manga is almost exclusively used to refer to Japanese print comics, but the real meaning and nuance of the word is kind of similar to the English word cartoon. Think about this word for a second. Think about what a cartoon is. The first thing that pops into your head is probably something along the lines of Looney Tunes or SpongeBob, right? But is this a cartoon? Or how about this? Or even this? In much the same way, though manga does generally refer to serialized print comics in Japanese, the nuance and the exact meaning of it changes depending on the broader context. It's much more about the presence of that visual code. So the first work to be considered strictly an anime is Atom, or Astro Boy. This is due to its immense popularity, the popularization of limited animation techniques, and as Steinberg notes, how those techniques allowed for the proliferation of easily iconic merchandise in the form of stickers and candy. But it wasn't immediately called anime. In fact, for a while, Atom and its peers were referred to as terebi manga. And to this day, even many goods from the 70s, 80s, hell, even the early 90s, are marketed with this terebi manga term. The term animation had started to gain usage amongst industry professionals around about this time due to the number of international co-productions, but it wasn't until around about the time of the publication of the otaku magazine Animage in the 70s that this term started to enter into the public usage. According to Suzuki Toshio, the editor of the magazine, who went on to work at some small studio, I can't fucking remember the name, but the name Animage is a portmanteau of the English animation and the French image. This is notable due to its spelling and pronunciation in Japanese, image, because modern Japanese also has a loan word for image from English, and it's spelled imeji. So it's possible from Animage where the term anime and the abbreviation came from. So now in modern Japan, it's all fine and dandy and it's used to refer to every single piece of Japanese animation that's ever made now. Right? Well, yes and no. If you say just anime on its own, most people will probably think you're referring to television animation. Many original theatrical release films, especially those under high-profile directors such as Shinkai Motoko, are released under the banner of animation eiga. Many franchise films aren't even referred to under this animation eiga banner, but rather they're referred to as gekijouban anime, theatrical version anime, in order not to compete with the original television works and also to distinguish it from, say, the likes of OVAs, ONAs. For example, the Demon Slayer movie, the highest grossing anime film in Japan, is labeled under this gekijouban term. So as you can see, there are a myriad of historical and generational terms that were used well before the adoption of anime, and many that are still distinct and in use. To this day, Miyazaki remains critical of anime. Most of you have most likely seen that stupid anime was a mistake meme poster thing that's completely fabricated. But it's interesting to note that Miyazaki still refers to his own movies as manga eiga or simply animation, separate from anime. But what about the Japanese people use it to refer to all animation, regardless of country? Yeah, that's true, they definitely do, especially in quick and casual conversations or just talking about the movies and shows they like. So there's nothing exactly wrong with that at all. It's important to remember that most Japanese people are people, and therefore not all of them are experts, nor even huge fans. And while that doesn't devalue their opinion at all, it should be taken as what it is, especially in regards to anime criticism. There's also something very Orientalist about this approach to me. I mean, think about all the people in your life who have ever referred to animation as a genre, or that all animation is for kids. Imagine if the same logic was applied and Japanese people were going around saying things like, Westerners use animation to refer to a genre of film and television for children. While on that note, who exactly are Westerners? France has a very long history of animation. It also has a very long history with anime. From the first airing of Grendizer and Candy Candy in 1978, anime had a very firm hold in the French television market, with one interviewee stating in Darling Wolf's Imagining the Global, in our eyes it was much stronger than Walt Disney. In this period of mass import and export with Japan, they also started a fairly sizable number of co-productions, kickstarted by René Borges, I can't believe that's his real name, Zoom the White Dolphin. This is all very important to note due to the French word for animation, TheCynicClinic, literally meaning design cartoon. Unfortunately, the timeline does get a little bit fuzzy here. You can't get into the specifics of which way it went. It does line up quite nicely with the first publication of Animage, and the French influence on anime is undeniable, as with the aforementioned story of how the title came to be, but the first exact usage of anime is hard to pinpoint, and the original user will probably never be found. Like most slang, it was probably a teenage girl in Shibuya. Regardless, one thing that is very likely is that this French word had an influence on the English-speaking fandom. First, I believe this is the reason why the English word was originally spelt with a diacritic, the accent mark here. I mean, where else did that come from? It doesn't come from Japanese, they don't know what the fuck this is, I don't know what the fuck this is. In much the same way that résumé, imported from French, is spelt with the diacritic, as to not confuse it with resume. Another thing that could point to French influence is comparing its English pronunciation to other Japanese loanwords. Words that end in e, such as sake, karaoke, karate, in Japanese tend to be said with an e in English, like saki, karaoke, karate. Pronouncing it anime sounds weird, right? Common English phonetics points to this being pronounced anime, right? So where does it come from? Both the English verb to animate and the French equivalent come from the same Latin root of animare or anima, which means soul or to give life or to... I'm just gonna stop myself there. Almost every single guide seems to point out that both English and French share the same Latin root. I don't really think it's that much of a big deal, and it's often needlessly highlighted over other, more important information. Words change meaning all the time, and it is important to trace back their roots, but for a medium as young as animation, I think a language that has been dead for well over 1500 years is a bit too far. It's still entirely possible that the French and English borrowed Japanese word just arose coincidentally. I'm not saying that can't happen, but to say that it is definite because they share the same Latin root and just wash your hands of it like that is irresponsible. So anime has become a term in Japan, right? Well, how did we get it back into English? According to Pioneer fan Fred Patton in his book Watching Anime, Reading Manga, a book with a terrible title but an awesome cover, the original anime fans in the West simply spoke of Japanese cartoons or Japanese animation. Several people claimed credit for the shorthand Japanimation, the loudest of which being one of the original founders of the cartoon fantasy organization, the first ever anime club in North America, Carl Gafford. This caught on quickly because it was catchy and detailed the origin of where the product came from, but it quickly fell out of use because it was a little bit clunky and it could very easily be turned into the pejorative Jap animation. Meanwhile, in the emerging late 80s UK market, manga animation was often being used in a sort of strange parallel manner to the original Japanese manga eiga or terebi manga. But this didn't catch on. This is actually where the distributor, Manga Entertainment, gets its namesake from, despite the fact that they don't sell printed comics at all. They only sell audiovisual material. Around about the same time in the US, several fan publications were trying to ape the success of Animage with titles such as Animag or Animanga. And along with getting more high-quality imports from Japan and seeing that they use the term anime, and influence from the already sturdy European markets such as France, Spain, and Italy, the term finally started to solidify amongst fans with conventions such as Project Acon and Anime Expo. Ironically, it was the god-awful Japanimation that was first picked up by the mainstream media when anime was getting more and more visible, with Patton noting that the advertising often sold promises along the lines of, "Those who are in the know call this new medium of entertainment Japanimation." The term stuck, usually in a mocking fashion, and it's probably stuck due to the fact that it was instantly recognizable for what it was and where it came from to the uninitiated, and this continued well into the late 2000s, even as late as the watershed moment that was Spirited Away. In the 41 reviews compiled on Metacritic, more than half of them didn't mention the term anime at all. So after all this, I'm going to ask you a question. Is anime English? And I don't mean is anime English, but anime. Because in English, no matter who you talk to, and despite how recent it's actually been in use, anime is distinct from animation. The how and why is usually another story, but everyone agrees there is a line somewhere. Two of the most important terms in linguistics are prescriptivism and descriptivism. Prescriptivism being where you say a rule is a rule and that's the end of it, and descriptivism being an evidence-based approach based on how people actually use the language. So, for example, a prescriptivist take might be, you can't end a sentence with a conjunction. You can't. And a descriptivist one might be, but people do all the time, so you totally can. Most of the time, I despise prescriptivism, so part of me wants to say that the English usage of anime to mean Japanese animation is totally okay. But I don't know, man, it just doesn't sit right with me. Doing so leads to oversimplification and erasure of lineage and knowledge and history, and isn't it just another form of prescriptivism to say that all anime has to come from Japan? Especially considering the amount of outsourcing that goes on and its widespread soft power influence. I mean, isn't that a bit strict? The purpose of this video was not to outline what I think is and isn't anime. That's a whole other can of worms. Do I think that Avatar: The Last Airbender is anime? No. It has definite visual influence, but its construction is ultimately very, very Western. Do I think Utsumusume Sayuri is anime? No, it looks nothing like it. Did I add Sayuri on Mao? Hell yeah, fam, get that number up, son! Would I add Avatar or Mal if it was on there? Fucking of course, son, get them games, get me the CEO of Mal on the phone. I ultimately use anime to refer to Japanese cartoons in conversation because it's ultimately just easier as a shorthand. It's an amorphous, confusing, and ultimately exhausting thing to try and categorize everything into a neat little bubble. Rather, I just wanted to explore the history and lineage of the term, and how the term isn't nearly as simple as it seems. How it formed through the convergence of multiple different languages, how its widespread usage in English is fairly recent, and how throwing it around willy-nilly just isn't very productive. As Hernandez Perez states in Japanese media cultures in Japan and abroad, Japaneseness is not an exclusive or absolute quality, but a degree of relationship between these products and Japan, particularly its visual heritage. Anime the term has a history as complex and nuanced as anime the phenomenon, or animation the medium, and who knows how we'll be using it in the decades to come. Who knows, but it's why I made this video. Actually, that's a lie, because the real reason I made this video is because I want you to stop commenting anime on my shit. I don't say anime. What are you talking about? I don't say anime. I say anime. It's different. I mean, yeah, sure, it's not exactly the same as anime or anime. I mean, it's hard to get the Japanese, pitch accent patterns in there with English stress and everything like that. But who cares? It's just how I pronounce it. I just kind of train myself to pronounce it when I learn Japanese. I mean, if you're gonna make fun of me for my weeb shit, at least make fun of me for my actual weeb shit. Why are you putting anime? That is not how English phonetic works.